So over on the NA version of the game, Caster's actually on raid up with like Gilgamesh and Ozymandias, and the reason that's actually kind of a big deal is that he's one of the story locked 3-star servants, so he's not in the general pool, and not everybody has access to this servant. I mean, everybody has at least NP1 for finishing Fuyuki, but unless you actually go out of your way to roll on like the story banner or on a banner that actually has him on raid up, you're probably not going to have him at higher NP copies. And so I thought it'd actually be really good to actually talk about Caster because he gets really good in the future. And on that note, for all of his skills and his NP and everything, I'm just going to talk about them as they currently are on the JP version of the game. So that way NA players can see how good this guy actually develops into after he gets some of his buffs. And he's quite a very powerful servant that you can use for more difficult content, or even use him for farming if you get higher NP copies of him, because NP1 his damage is kind of abysmal, but if you summon on, say, the Gilgamesh and Ozzy banner, because he's the 3-star that is on raid up, you probably have a really good chance of walking away with this guy at NP5 after like a multi or two. Then again, if you've seen my summons for Izo or for Mori Nagayoshi, right, you guys know that the 3-stars aren't always guaranteed. So you have a high chance of being able to do that, but it's definitely not guaranteed. Before we begin, if you have not already, make sure to leave a like on the video and you subscribe to the channel for daily FGO content. Also, every weekday, I do stream FGO and other games on my Twitch, which is linked down in the description down below. I usually start at about 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And with that little plug done at the beginning of this video, let's dive right into Ku, starting off with his hits. And even though he's a Buster AoE caster, you'll notice that he's rocking a triple arts deck, and that is because year 1 servants, especially like casters, were locked into like specific deck types, right? Like pretty much all casters had triple arts decks, lancers had like double buster, double quick, a lot of sabers were like double buster, double arts. Everyone was kind of already like locked into a category. So even though it'd probably be better for him to have double buster, double arts, so he could actually buster brave chain with his own NP, at the very least, this does mean he can arch chain by himself, which is really nice for consistency. Although with 2 of his buffs that he's received, they've already kind of buffed the consistency that he's at, but just something to kind of make a note of. Also something to make a note of is his redonkulously high NP gain stat at 1.6%. Keep in mind that we consider like a good NP gain stat being like 0.7 or 0.8. This guy's at 1.6. Now, it's for the same reason that a lot of other people like, say, Medea and Waver have like really high NP gain stats. It's A, they're really old servants, and B, they only have 1 hit on their arts card. So even though the NP gain is really high, and critting on it is still good for NP refund, because they don't have multiple hits to take advantage of it, it's not as quote-unquote broken as it seems. It's still really good, especially with the fact that he can just arch chain with himself. And on top of all of that, he has like a passive 8% arts buff as well, so they're just even better at NP refunding. But it's kind of like the main thing to really talk about with his hits, because he's a low rarity year 1 servant, so all of his hits aren't super great. I mean, 2 hits on the 1 quick card with 10.9% star gen. Like, the star gen stat itself is not bad, it's just the hits aren't high enough to really take advantage of that. I mean, dude, even the extra attack over here only has 3 hits. So it's safe to say that the hits are not going to be saving this servant, but like I mentioned towards the beginning, what is keeping this guy up and why I think he's so good are his skills, because all of his skills are pretty dang nutty. So starting off with his first skill, it is a 50% crit damage buff for free for 3 turns. That also gives him 50% debuff resistance for 3 turns as well. And when it gets buffed, it's going to give him a 30% battery, all on a 5-turn cooldown. This is actually why you can use him for farming, because that 30% battery can actually combine with his append skill, give him a fake 50% battery, or you can use him with something like a K-scope or something along those lines, and you could farm with that as well. And so if you don't have someone like, say, Caster Nero or something to do your buster farming with, you can actually make use of this guy, and it makes him really useful. But being able to do some really good crit damage as well, because keep in mind that 50% is the same crit buff that Waver gives to people, just to kind of give you a little bit of a gauge of how strong this is. It does mean that his crits will actually bite a little bit as well. And even though he's an older servant, I do like that he has the 50% debuff resistance. Nowadays, he would probably have 100% if this was more modernized. But 50% for an older servant is still really good, because that basically means it's a coin flip chance, basically, to whiff any buffs. So that applies to like getting stunned, getting charmed, getting his attack lowered, stuff along those lines. So it is pretty nice. This skill in and of itself is really good if you want to use him for farming, but it's also really good if you want him to like fight some bosses or something, because you can smack him with crits. And then he also has a way to pretty much negate, or at least have a coin flip chance of negating any annoying things the boss might try to do to him. And that's just the first skill. The second skill pretty much is the Ku dodge skill that everybody knows and loves. It gives him 3 free hits of evasion on a 5-turn cooldown that never wear off, right? As long as you never get hit or tagged at all, you're never going to burn any of these dodges, right? That's why Ku is so good for like survivability missions, because the dodges never wear off on like a turn timer. They have to get used in order to be used up, and it makes it really good for survivability, which is pretty nice for the Buster meta right now, because if you're using him with Koyenskaya's method of survivability is obliterating the opponent. She doesn't even have like Merlin's illusion skills, so the onus is kind of on the DPS that's being supported to kind of have their own method of survivability. And this is not only good because it's 3 hits of evasion, but it's also a nice 18% defensive buff for those 3 turns as well. So if they have like Pierce invincibility or something, you could still like kind of mitigate the damage. But overall, this is just one of those skills you can pop and pretty much have it up at all times to make sure that your guy has a little bit of a security blanket on him. Now, the third skill is where things get a little bit insane, because it goes from like, oh yeah, it removes debuffs if a debuff gets through and it gives him a nice little heal, to then just smacking this guy with like 80 different buffs. So for one, it gives him a nice 30% attack buff for 3 turns. That already in and of itself is very, very strong, especially because he also got an upgrade to his NP that gave him a Buster buff, so now he can actually double buff himself, which is really, really strong. And then he actually gets a Guts that whenever it's triggered, it charges his own NP gauge by 80%, which is really, really broken. Basically, if they get through his second skill, they get through all of his defenses and everything, and they actually do manage to kill him, he'll revive himself, give himself an 80% battery, so he can go out with like one last blaze of glory with Wicker Man, and then unfortunately he will die the next turn because he does have the sacrifice buff. If you're worried that your Ku might accidentally die if you pop the skill, don't worry, you can pretty much just throw this up there, because they do have to get through all 3 of his dodges and everything. They got to get through him doing damage to the opponent, they got to get through his defense and all that stuff for them to even trigger the Guts. The Guts is also just another layer of survivability as well, and I think getting like the attack buff is really worth it as well for just good, decent damage for Ku to be able to do. And I kind of already mentioned the NP, so we'll just hop over there because it kind of ties into this. Every time he fires his NP, he's going to stack 20% Buster for 3 turns, which is really good because not only does it proc first, but every time he fires his NP is going to be doing more and more damage. This is also really nice if you get a Buster crit. Again, like I mentioned, that Buster buff is going to multiply into that attack buff on his 3rd skill, but simultaneously, his NP is also going to do more damage every single time, because every time he fires his NP, he's reducing the enemy's defense by 10 to 30% for 3 turns, meaning that he also is stacking defense down on the opponent as well, which also lets him do more damage. So even if you look at his NP damage numbers, it's kind of like, oh, NP 5, he's not looking super great, but that's just like the first NP. Then we start getting like defense downs going, then we start stacking our Buster buffs, and stuff can kind of get a little out of hand. And in general, he's just a really strong, I don't want to say free-to-play servant because he is story locked, but the fact that he is a 3-star is more of like, not free-to-play, but I guess easy to acquire servant, right? If you don't have someone like Nero Caster, or if you don't pull like the new Wu Zetian when she comes out for Summer 7, right? If you don't pull any of those guys, Ku can be really good. I guess he does have some competition with Avisabron as well. Although Avisabron and Ku do about the same levels of damage, and you could argue that like Ku gets better every single wave that he's doing it because he's getting more and more Buster every single time. But regardless, I just wanted to make this video talking about Ku Caster because I feel like there's a lot of people on the NA version that don't know how good this guy is actually going to get when they start giving him more and more of his buffs. Especially when Lost Belt 6 comes out and he gets that buff to his 3rd skill that actually makes him really, really strong. And it's also kind of like a note for like, oh, if you do pull him when you're like pulling for Gilgamesh or Ozymandias, don't just like throw him away or anything. Don't be like, he's like some year 1 servant. It's like, no. He gets really, really good. I would definitely consider using this guy. Level him up. He's a 3-star. It's not super resource intensive. It's a lot easier than leveling up like a 5-star servant, right? The QP is way, way less. Give the guy a spin. And that's basically all I wanted to communicate with this video. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Am I gassing up Coup Caster a little bit too much, or is he a little underrated like I think he is? Regardless, I will see you guys tomorrow in the next video. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace. Late, guys.